You won't believe how one small discovery can unravel 15 years of marriage. It started on an ordinary Tuesday evening, the kind of night when life feels so steady you forget how fragile it really is. Our son, Ethan, had caught the flu, and I was searching through drawers for his old medical papers. The smell of laundry detergent lingered in the bedroom, the ceiling fan hummed, and nothing in that moment suggested my world was about to tilt off its axis. Her drawer wasn't locked. It never had been. But tucked beneath a stack of folded scarves and receipts was a large white envelope, the kind used by clinics or insurance offices. My first instinct was practical. Maybe it was Ethan's lab work. I only opened it because I thought it might save us a late-night trip to urgent care. But when I slid my thumb under the seal and pulled out the document inside, I felt the air leave my lungs. DNA paternity test results. My name wasn't listed as the father. I didn't speak, didn't shout, didn't even move for a full minute. The silence pressed in, heavy and absolute. I'd always considered myself a calm man, maybe too calm, according to my wife, Claire, but in that moment, calm was the only thing keeping me upright. I read the report twice, then a third time, searching for a printing error, a missing page, a rational mistake that would make this something less than what it was. Then I saw something odd. The mother's name, the one printed in block letters, wasn't quite right. Off by one letter. Claire without the I. It seemed insignificant, almost laughably small. But my instincts twitched. Claire was meticulous. She never misspelled her own name. Never. That was the splinter. The rest of the night, I went through the motions. Dinner, dishes, small talk about work, her laughter as if nothing were wrong. I mirrored it, even managed a joke or two. But every glance she gave me felt different now. Sharper, studied. I caught myself wondering if she could tell that I knew, that somewhere inside me, something irreversible had shifted. When she went to bed, I stayed in the living room with a glass of whiskey, the document folded in my pocket like a live grenade. I replayed every year of our marriage, looking for cracks I might have missed, business trips, sudden friends, the way she sometimes looked at me when she thought I wasn't watching. Each memory bent under the weight of a question I'd never asked. The next morning, I didn't confront her. I kissed her cheek, told her to drive safe, and watched her taillights fade down the street. Then I sat at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and began looking for the kind of details most husbands never think to check. Her birth certificate, old school records, archived photos. And that's when the cracks widened. Some of the documents she'd shown me years ago, the ones she'd kept in a neat blue folder marked personal, didn't line up with what I found online. The birth date was right. The hometown matched. But the signature on the school transcript looked forged. The notary seal on her old driver's license looked blurred, like it had been photocopied. It was all close enough to pass at a glance, but not to a man who builds his life on precision. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my brother, not even my mother, who has the instincts of a hawk when it comes to family trouble. I simply kept digging, quietly. By the end of that week, I wasn't looking for signs of infidelity anymore. I was looking for proof that my wife was who she said she was. That night, when she leaned against the kitchen counter smiling, telling me about her day, I watched her like a stranger. Every laugh, every word, every touch, rehearsed, deliberate, just slightly off. Like she was reading from someone else's life. And maybe she was. Because deep down, beneath the shock and confusion, a darker realization began to bloom, one I wasn't ready to voice yet, even to myself. Whoever Claire really was, she'd been playing this role for a very, very long time. It's strange how quickly curiosity turns into obsession. At first, I just wanted to understand what I'd found, the DNA test, the misspelled name, the inconsistencies. But within a few days, I wasn't sleeping much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that envelope, that single letter missing from her name. It felt like a hole in reality, and I couldn't stop staring through it. I started small. I checked public records, marriage license, property deeds, tax filings. Everything looked normal, but it all started 15 years ago. Before that, there was nothing. No history, no trail, no trace of Claire Evans in any database I could find. It was as if she'd appeared out of thin air the year we met. That's when the unease started to feel like dread. I remembered how, back then, she'd said she'd moved from another state. A small town near the border, she'd told me. She'd brushed it off whenever I asked for details. I thought it was shyness. Now, I wondered if it was strategy. The first real break came on a Wednesday night, long after she'd gone to bed. I found an old copy of her driver's license in our filing cabinet, the same one she'd used when we bought our house. The photo was definitely her, but the issue date was 1 month before we met. And something about the lamination looked off. The next day, I took a longer lunch break and drove to the DMV. The clerk was an older man with tired eyes, the kind who'd seen enough bureaucracy to be numb to it. When I handed him the photocopy, I kept my tone casual. "Just curious," I said. "Can you tell me if this is still valid?" He frowned at the paper, then at me. "You said her name's Claire Evans?" "That's right." He typed for a while, then his eyebrows knit together. "We don't have anyone by that name matching this license number in our system." My stomach dropped. "Maybe there's a mistake," I said. "Could you double-check?" He did. Then he looked up again. "That number doesn't exist anymore. It's not in our records at all." I thanked him and left before he could ask more questions. In the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel, staring at the traffic light ahead. My hands weren't shaking, not yet, but the quiet inside me was starting to feel dangerous. That evening, when I came home, Claire was in the kitchen, humming as she cooked. She greeted me with a smile, kissed my cheek, and asked about my day. I watched her, that easy warmth she wore like second nature, and all I could think was, how much of this was real? "Hey," I said, keeping my voice light, "do you still have your old ID? The one before this state?" She blinked, mid-stir. "Why?" "Just curious. I was updating some insurance info, and they asked for any previous addresses." Her face barely changed, but her pause was long, just half a beat too long. "I'm sure it's somewhere in my files," she said. "Why?" "Just being thorough." She smiled again, but it was tight this time. The corners of her mouth pulled a little too high. "You and your details," she teased. "Always so organized." I laughed with her, played along, but inside, something was crystallizing, cold, deliberate. That night, after she fell asleep, I went back to her desk. The drawer where I'd found the DNA test was locked now. It hadn't been before. That told me two things. She knew I'd been in there, and she was hiding something else. So I adapted. The next morning, I texted an old friend, someone who owed me a favor. His name was Jonathan Pike, a private investigator I'd helped years ago when he was starting out. I'd built him a custom office space in exchange for a promise I never thought I'd need. "If you ever find yourself in something messy, call me first." I sent him a message. "Need a background check. Sensitive. Quiet. Name: Claire Evans, or possibly Claire. Married 15 years. No trace before that." He replied in minutes. "You got it. Give me 48 hours. When I closed my phone, Claire was still asleep beside me, her hand resting on my chest. I watched her breathe, slow, peaceful, unaware. I wanted to believe there was a good explanation, that maybe this was all a mix-up, but I'd spent my whole life trusting what I could see, what I could measure, and what I saw now didn't add up. The woman I'd built my life around had no past, and for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't sure she even had a name. 48 hours later, Jonathan called. His voice was lower than usual, the kind of tone people use when they're trying not to break bad news over the phone. "Dean," he said, "you got a minute?" I was in my truck, parked outside a job site, the engine idling. "Go ahead." He paused. That hesitation told me more than I wanted to know. "You were right. Something's off. Your wife, Claire Evans, she doesn't exist before 2009. At least, not officially. No birth certificate, no social security record, no trace of employment, schooling, nothing. It's like she just appeared." My fingers tightened on the steering wheel. "What do you mean, appeared?" "I mean her identity starts abruptly. First appearance on record, driver's license application, April 2009. Same month you told me you met her, right?" "Yeah." He sighed. "Well, before that date, the name Claire Evans doesn't exist in any verifiable database. But here's the weird part. I found something close. Claire Evanson. Born the same year, same month, same day. Lived in Ohio until 2008. Then disappeared after a financial fraud case involving her employer." I said nothing. Jonathan continued, his voice now steady, clinical. "Evanson was under investigation for embezzlement, a mid-level accounting employee at a real estate firm. She wasn't charged. Her boss took the fall, but she was listed as a person of interest. Shortly after the scandal hit, she vanished. No forwarding address, No new job, no contact. Just gone. I swallowed hard. And you're telling me? I'm saying the physical resemblance is uncanny. Same height, same hair, same birth date. I can't confirm it's the same woman yet. But if I were a betting man, I'd put money on it. The line went quiet. I could hear my own pulse, slow and heavy, in the space between his words. Send me everything, I said finally. I'll drop the file tomorrow morning. That night, I didn't go home right away. I drove around town, circling the same few streets, watching the world move as if nothing had changed. Neon signs flickered. People laughed over dinners, walked their dogs, waved at neighbors. Ordinary life, the kind I thought I had. By the time I walked through the door, it was past 10. Claire was on the couch, reading, her hair tied back loosely, a blanket over her legs. She smiled up at me. Long day. I nodded. Yeah, long. Eat anything? Not really. I made pasta. It's in the kitchen. She said it like any wife would, like 15 years of shared dinners still meant something. But I stood there, looking at her, at this person I'd loved, built a life with, built a family with. And for the first time, I couldn't see her clearly. It was like trying to focus on a photograph that had been tampered with. The next morning, Jonathan handed me a manila folder thick enough to hurt. I took it without a word, drove straight to the lake near our neighborhood, parked by the water, and opened it. Inside were printouts of records, bank statements, corporate filings, old ID scans, and photos. One of them stopped me cold. It was her. Or at least, it looked like her. Younger, maybe by 5 years. Same eyes, same jawline, but a different name printed beneath, Claire Evanson. The last documented address was a small apartment in Toledo. The file said she'd vacated it suddenly in August 2008, just a month after her company went under. The property manager noted she'd left no forwarding information and that the unit contained evidence of identity document alterations. Forgery. I flipped through the rest of the report, small notes that painted a larger picture. She'd worked at a firm called Brooks and Hale Realty. After the fraud scandal, her name surfaced in deposition notes but was later redacted. A few witnesses claimed she'd handled the accounts, but none could say exactly what role she played. Then I hit the last page. A local newspaper clipping. Missing woman connected to Brooks and Hale case. Authorities still searching for former employee, Claire Evanson. Date, September 2008. Missing. I leaned back in my seat, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. My wife, the woman I'd met less than a year later, had supposedly vanished off the face of the earth right before she became someone new. That evening, I watched her cook again. The rhythmic way she chopped vegetables, the casual ease of her humming. Nothing seemed off. Nothing seemed dangerous. But knowing what I knew, every movement carried a shadow now. At dinner, she asked, "You're quiet tonight." "Just tired," I said. She smiled faintly, touching my hand. "You work too hard." Her hand was warm, familiar, and yet it felt foreign, like shaking hands with a ghost wearing my wife's skin. Later that night, I sat alone in the dark and studied the photograph of her old face again. The truth wasn't just whispering anymore. It was screaming. And for the first time since I found that DNA test, I realized this wasn't a story about betrayal. It was about identity, and the terrifying question of who, exactly, was sleeping beside me every night. The next morning, I woke before dawn, unable to shake the image of that photograph, the younger version of my wife, staring back at me through time with the same eyes, but none of the warmth. It was like looking at an early draft of the person I thought I knew. Claire was still asleep when I left the house. The sky was pale gray, the air sharp with the first hint of winter. I sat in my truck for a while, watching the light crawl across our lawn. 15 years of memories flashed like a reel I didn't recognize anymore. Our first apartment, her laugh the night we painted the living room, Ethan's first steps. All of it real, tangible. Yet every moment now carried a question mark I couldn't erase. By the time I got to the office, my phone buzzed. A text from Jonathan. "Got something new. You're going to want to see this in person." I met him at a diner 2 towns over. He was sitting in a corner booth, a half-empty mug of coffee in front of him and a folder that looked heavier than yesterday's. His expression told me everything. He'd found something big. He slid the folder across the table. "You might want to brace yourself." I flipped it open. Inside were records I hadn't seen before, court transcripts, financial ledgers, copies of police reports. But what caught my eye was a photo clipped to one of the pages, a group shot from the Brooks and Hale Realty team. And there she was again, my wife, smiling among her coworkers, her arm around a woman who looked eerily similar. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing to the woman beside her. "That's the real Claire Evans," Jonathan said quietly. The words didn't register at first. He continued, "Claire Evans, the one whose identity your wife assumed, was a junior accountant at the same company. She disappeared shortly before the fraud case went public. There was speculation she might have fled the country, but the police never confirmed it." I stared at the photo. The two women could have been sisters. Same height, same hair color, just subtle differences, the kind only people who truly pay attention would notice. "So she took her name," I said slowly. Jonathan nodded. "Everything lines up, the timing, the documents, even the driver's license issue date. Your wife became Claire Evans just months after the real one went missing." My throat felt dry. "You said missing. They never found her?" "No," he said, and his eyes met mine. "They stopped looking after a year." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The diner hummed around us, silverware clinking, the faint hiss of the coffee machine, a baby crying somewhere near the counter. Ordinary sounds in a world that suddenly didn't feel ordinary anymore. Jonathan finally broke the silence. "Dean, you need to be careful. If she's hiding something this serious, there's no telling what she's capable of if she thinks you know." I nodded but didn't answer. My mind was already 10 steps ahead. That night, I came home as usual, calm, composed. She was in the kitchen again, hair pulled back, humming softly. The same song she always hummed when she cooked. I watched her for a moment before stepping inside. "Hey," I said. She turned, smiling. "Hey yourself. Long day." "The usual. You?" I shrugged. "Same." We ate dinner together, small talk flowing easily. She told me about a client meeting, a grocery sale, a show she wanted to start watching. Every word sounded rehearsed, but not in a way I could call out. It was like she'd practiced being her for so long that it had become second nature. After dinner, she went upstairs to shower. I waited until I heard the water running, then slipped into her office. The drawer was still locked, but I'd already taken a photo of the key last week and had a copy made. The lock clicked open softly. Inside were the usual things: folders, receipts, insurance papers, but tucked behind a stack of old tax returns was a small black notebook. The kind with no label, no dates. I flipped it open. Most of it was ordinary: grocery lists, notes about Ethan's school, reminders. But halfway through, the tone changed. The handwriting was the same, but the words were colder, clipped. August 12th, can't use that name anymore. Too risky. September 3rd, new state, new records, new start. October 14th, he doesn't suspect a thing. He's kind. Maybe this could actually work. I read that line twice. He's kind. That was me. I closed the notebook, slid it back, and locked the drawer. Then I went upstairs, my heart steady, my expression neutral. She was brushing her hair in the mirror when I walked in. Steam clung to her skin, her reflection soft in the glass. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." She smiled, that same gentle smile I used to love, and turned back to the mirror. For a second, our eyes met in the reflection. She held my gaze a heartbeat too long, as if she was studying me the same way I'd been studying her. And that's when it hit me. Maybe she already knew. Maybe she'd always known that someday I'd start looking. As I climbed into bed that night, her breathing slow beside me, I realized I wasn't just living with a liar. I was living with someone who'd rewritten herself from the ground up. And I was the only one who knew how easily that kind of story could fall apart. The morning after I found the notebook, I woke before dawn and just stared at the ceiling. Claire was asleep beside me, her breathing slow and even. I studied her face, the same face I'd kissed for 15 years, and wondered how much of it I actually knew. I slipped out of bed quietly and went downstairs. The house felt colder than usual, still, almost waiting. I poured coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the silence thick enough to choke on. I didn't need more proof. The facts already told the story. My wife was living someone else's life. But what I couldn't shake was why. The more I thought about the real Claire Evans, the woman whose name my wife had taken, the sicker I felt. Was she alive somewhere, hiding? Or was she dead, erased to make room for the woman I thought I loved? By noon, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her, not until I knew everything. So, I called Jonathan. Can you find out what really happened to the real Claire Evans? I asked. He hesitated. That's not going to be easy. The trail's cold. Do it anyway, I said. And if you find something I shouldn't hear over the phone, bring it to me in person. There was a pause before he said, You think your wife's dangerous? I stared toward the staircase, where her shadow moved across the wall. I think she's capable of whatever she needs to be. That night, she was sitting at the kitchen table when I got home, a glass of wine in front of her, candlelight soft on her face. She smiled when she saw me. You're late, she said. Busy day. Everything okay? Yeah, work stuff. Her eyes lingered on me longer than usual. You've been quiet lately. So have you, I said. She laughed softly, swirling her glass. Maybe we're both getting boring. But her laugh didn't reach her eyes. Later that night, after she'd gone upstairs, I stayed on the couch. The house creaked, settling into its nighttime rhythm. Then, faintly, I heard her voice, low, urgent, on the phone. No, he doesn't know. Not yet. A pause. I told you, I'm handling it. Once this is clean, I'll disappear again if I have to. The words hit like a punch. Disappear again. She'd done it before. She could do it again. When I finally climbed the stairs, she was already in bed, pretending to sleep. I watched her for a long moment, her face peaceful, her breathing steady. How could someone hide so much behind such calm? The next morning, I called Jonathan again and told him what I'd heard. She's planning something, he said. If she thinks you're onto her, she might try to run. Then I'll be ready before she does, I said. That night, after she fell asleep, I copied everything. Marriage papers, bank statements, Ethan's birth certificate, all of it. I encrypted the files and sealed hard copies in an envelope under a loose floorboard in my office. Just as I was finishing, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Mr. Evans, this is Detective Lewis with the Toledo PD. I believe you're connected to a woman named Claire Evanson. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Toledo, the same city where her trail had started. Someone from her past had finally come knocking. And I had no idea whether I was about to uncover the truth or step into her unfinished crime. Detective Lewis called the next morning. His voice was steady, professional, but there was something beneath it, a curiosity, maybe even caution. Mr. Evans, thank you for returning my message, he said. This is regarding a cold case, the disappearance of a woman named Claire Evanson. You're listed as a known associate through public record. Associate? I repeated carefully. Yes, a Claire Evans is registered as your spouse. The similarity in names caught our attention during a recent audit of unresolved missing persons. I just have a few questions, if you don't mind. My pulse slowed, but my tone stayed calm. Of course. He asked how long I'd known my wife, where she was born, what she'd told me about her life before we met. I gave simple answers, nothing more than what was public knowledge. But when he asked if she'd ever mentioned Toledo, I paused. No, I said finally. Why? There was a long silence. Because Claire Evanson's last known residence was there. And based on your wife's information, her social security number was registered within the same month Claire's went inactive. He let the words sit for a moment. I'm not saying they're the same person, Mr. Evans. But the overlap is unusual. I see. He lowered his voice slightly. If you find anything, old documents, photos, anything suggesting your wife had a different name, I'd appreciate a call, even anonymous. Of course, I said and hung up. When I set the phone down, my reflection in the kitchen window stared back at me, calm, expressionless. A man listening to the sound of his own life quietly collapsing. That night, I watched her more carefully than ever. She was folding laundry on the couch, humming softly. The same old rhythm, the same disguise. I thought about the detective's tone, the way he said cold case. Missing for 15 years. Presumed dead. What if she hadn't just taken another woman's name? What if she'd erased the original to make room for herself? She looked up suddenly, catching me staring. What? She asked, smiling. Nothing, I said. Just thinking. About what? Work. Her smile lingered a moment too long, then faded. You've seemed distant lately. Maybe I'm tired, I said. Maybe we both are. She studied me quietly, searching for something behind my words. I kept my face neutral. Years of restraint had trained me well. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat in my office again and stared at the envelope of documents hidden beneath the floorboard. Every piece of her life fit too perfectly, like it had been built by hand. My phone buzzed again. Jonathan, got something. Call me when she's not around. I slipped outside into the cold. Talk. She's connected to a company called Arcadia Development, he said. Small real estate group out of Ohio, folded after a fraud scandal. Guess who signed the closing paperwork? Her. He hesitated. The real Claire Evans. But the signature was altered later. Forensics confirmed it. Same stroke pattern, but not the same hand. Someone forged it after she disappeared. The wind cut across my face. And let me guess, my wife's version of that name started showing up right after. Exactly. And there's one more thing. What? The day before the real Claire vanished, a withdrawal was made from her account. $28,000. Cash. Security footage shows a woman who looks almost identical to your wife. My breath left in a slow exhale. So she didn't just take her name. No, Jonathan said quietly. She took her life. I ended the call and stood there in the cold until the ache in my chest settled into something harder. Not grief. Not even betrayal. Just clarity. She'd built a life on top of someone else's grave. And for 15 years, she'd managed to make me part of it. When I came back inside, she was still awake, sitting at the table with a cup of tea. Her eyes met mine, steady and calm. You were outside a while, she said softly. Everything okay? Yeah, I lied. Just needed some air. She nodded slowly, her gaze following me as I walked past. And that's when I realized she wasn't fooled. She knew I was onto her. The air between us was no longer marriage. It was strategy, and whichever one of us moved first would decide how this story ended. Once I knew she suspected me, everything changed. The house became a stage, every smile, every word rehearsed and measured. I stopped being her husband and became her audience. And she, the woman I'd loved for 15 years, had begun performing for survival. I didn't confront her. I didn't accuse. I just waited. When you want the truth, you don't go kicking down the door. You hold it open and let the lies walk through on their own. That week, I kept my schedule exactly the same. Same coffee, same commute, same goodnight kiss. She needed to believe the ground beneath her was still stable, because only then would she make her next move. And she did. On Thursday, a courier showed up at my office. A cream envelope. Divorce papers. Filed under irreconcilable differences. She wanted the house, full custody, and half my savings. That was the moment everything clicked. She wasn't going to run. She was going to bury me instead. She must have realized the detective had contacted me. Or maybe Jonathan's digging had surfaced somewhere it shouldn't have. Either way, she was moving fast, trying to take control before her old life caught up. I didn't get angry. I didn't even sigh. I just smiled, signed for the envelope, and set it gently on my desk. Then I made one call. Jonathan, I said, I think she's about to make her play. Let's finish ours. That evening, I went home as if nothing had happened. The lights were on. She was sitting at the kitchen island, pouring herself a glass of wine. Her face was calm, but her eyes were scanning, gauging. She was waiting to see if I knew. Rough day? She asked lightly. Long one, I replied, hanging up my jacket. You? She shrugged. Just the usual. Paid a few bills. Called the lawyer. I raised an eyebrow, pretending surprise. Lawyer? She smiled thinly. You'll know soon enough. I poured myself a drink and clinked my glass gently against hers. To honesty, then. She froze just for a heartbeat. A flicker so small anyone else would have missed it. But I saw it. I always saw it. By the next morning, she had her lawyer serve me officially. The papers were delivered to my office in a thick envelope with her signature stamped cleanly across the bottom. She wanted everything. The house, the car, Ethan, even my pension fund. Her lawyer, a smug man in a tailored suit, smiled like victory was already his. But I'd been building my own case quietly, piece by piece. Identity theft, forgery, fraud, a false marriage certificate, and, courtesy of Jonathan's digging, evidence tying her to the embezzlement that destroyed her old company. Every document authenticated, every photo timestamped, all of it waiting inside a sealed envelope. When her lawyer slid the papers across my desk, I didn't argue. I didn't even read them. I just looked him in the eye and said, "You might want to deliver this to your client before celebrating." He frowned, opening the envelope slowly. I watched his color drain as he flipped through the contents. The fake IDs, the DNA test, the investigator's report, and the police records. He didn't finish reading. He just looked up at me, pale. What is this? Your client's real biography, I said evenly. Might want to advise her to settle out of court. Or better yet, cooperate with the Toledo police. They've been waiting 15 years for her to resurface. By the time I got home that evening, the news had already broken. Local woman arrested for identity fraud tied to 2008 embezzlement scandal. Her photo, my wife's photo, filled the screen. Neighbors said she was quiet, polite, the kind of woman who waved at mailmen and baked cookies for school fundraisers. They always do. I watched it all unfold with the same calm I'd carried since the night I found the DNA test. Then the phone rang. An older woman's voice, trembling. How could you know our 15-year-old secret? Her mother. Or at least, the woman who used to be Claire's mother. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't come with shouting or fury. Sometimes it comes wrapped in paperwork. Precise, quiet, legal. I poured myself a drink, looked around the empty house, and finally let out the breath I'd been holding for months. It was over. And the strangest part? I didn't feel anger or relief, just peace. Because I hadn't just uncovered her lies, I'd reclaimed my life from them. And when justice finally came knocking, I was already sitting at the table, waiting with the door unlocked. The day after her arrest, the house felt different. Still, but not empty. More like it was exhaling for the first time in years. I stood in the living room with my coffee, watching the early sunlight creep across the hardwood floors, the same way it had every morning since we moved in. Only now, it hit differently. It was honest light, not bending around secrets anymore. The police came that afternoon to collect a few of her things. Evidence, they called it. Her computer, a few files from her office, and the small black notebook I'd found. One of the officers, a woman with tired eyes, looked at me gently and said, "You did the right thing." I nodded, though it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the quiet after a storm, when everything's still standing, but nothing looks quite the same. Ethan didn't know the details. I told him Mom had to go away for a while. He asked why, and I told him the only thing I could say without breaking his world in half. She made a mistake she couldn't fix. He didn't cry. He just nodded, small and serious, and asked if we could order pizza. Kids have a way of seeing through things, not to the truth, but straight to the heart of it. By the end of the week, her face was everywhere. News outlets were calling it the quietest identity scandal in state history. The real Claire Evans had been confirmed dead, her remains found years ago near a wooded area outside Toledo. My wife, Claire Evanson, had been living under her name ever since. She'd confessed eventually. Not to murder, but to covering it up. She claimed the real Claire had died in an accident after the fraud broke. Claimed she panicked, ran, and rebuilt her life from scratch. The investigators said they might never know if it was the truth. But I'd learned something about her long before they did. Lying wasn't her weakness. It was her art. When her lawyer called to discuss the divorce settlement, I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The court voided our marriage once the records were proven false. 15 years, erased with a signature. The judge called it a technical annulment. I called it a release. A week later, Detective Lewis asked to meet. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, his notebook open between us. "You're a patient man, Mr. Evans," he said. "Patience," I replied, was all I had. He nodded thoughtfully. "You know, most people, when they find out they've been lied to like that, they burn everything down. You didn't." I stirred my coffee. "Fire's loud. Paperwork lasts longer." He chuckled softly. "You should consider consulting. You've got a mind for details." I smiled. "No thanks. I'm done digging through lies." When I got home that night, I opened the last remaining box of her things. Inside were small pieces of a life that never existed. Photos, letters, jewelry, keepsakes of a story she'd written and cast herself in. I left the box on the porch for the police to collect in the morning. Then I walked upstairs to Ethan's room. He was asleep, one arm thrown over his head, his breathing soft and even. I stood there for a moment, just watching him. He wasn't mine by blood, but that didn't change what mattered. He was my son, always had been. And I'd be damned if I let her choices rewrite that. Before I went to bed, I poured one last drink and stood by the window. Outside, the world looked ordinary again. Cars passing, porch lights glowing, someone walking their dog down the street. All of it steady. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't watching for what would break next. I was watching what would grow. I thought about her last words before they took her away. She'd looked at me through the squad car window and whispered, "You won't understand. I was just trying to survive." Maybe she believed that. Maybe, in her own twisted way, it was true. But survival built on someone else's life isn't living. It's theft with a heartbeat. I took a long sip, set the glass down, and whispered to the empty room, "You survived. I lived." And for the first time in 15 years, that finally felt like enough.